delighted to be here with Singapore's Jawahar Kanjalal. And he's the CEO of Streams. And Jawahar, you are a true inventor, innovator. I am fascinated by your story, I confess. We're going to talk about how Jawahar helped enhance the lives of literally millions of people in emerging markets. And we're going to talk about, there was a great story about you that I know you're aware of, that aired in Forbes in 2009. And so we're going to discuss how mobile solutions can connect people even in the most remote places. And such access, of course, especially during COVID, right, has been extremely important. So welcome, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure, thank you for having me here.
So Jawahar, in 2007, you're sitting in your office in Singapore, and you get a call from your boss in Finland at Nokia, the phone giant, the cellular giant Nokia, and he says, you need to go out and seek new service opportunities for Nokia where none exist today. And you say what? What do you say? How do you respond?
Well, you know, in those days, Nokia was the king of the hill. And as part of that transition to consolidate its position further, Nokia had reorganized itself into all services and services units together. And the other was a devices business group. So as part of the services unit, the business group, there was an emerging market services business unit that was created within that giant service business group. So I get this call from my boss to be at that point in time. And he says that, well, would you be interested in heading this emerging market services business unit globally? I says, well, great. What is the mandate? Says, you've got to go and create something that doesn't exist. You've got to go and create services for the emerging markets, from the emerging markets. To that, I said, what is the motivation? And he says, you know, the CEO believes that Nokia can add much more value than just voice and SMS. So how does it become more integrated into people's lives? And that too at the bottom of the pyramid, the first time mobile phone users. So I'll take you back, it's more than a decade now. I'll take you back in time, close to 13, 14 years back. At that point in time, phones, the cheapest ones were about $100, $150. So they were not really very accessible as they are today, right? And Facebook, WhatsApp were not heard of at all in this part of the world, definitely. And they were just probably in the college dorms taking shape. So the data revolution was yet to happen. And this was just when the first iPhone was launched, right? So the app stores and stuff were not there at all. I'm taking you back into that era.
Unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember it. And Facebook, I believe, was launched in 2004 or 2005, around that period. So you were among you know, some fantastic global inventors and global pioneers, right?
Yes, I was fortunate to be at the right place, right time, and I had to apply myself to those opportunities and create you know, services and opportunities. So the conversation went like this, and they said that, okay, I don't know what you'll build, but I can tell you what you should not be doing. And honestly, when I reflect back in my journey, those were the greatest pieces of wisdom I got. So he said, don't go looking for inspiration in an advanced market in a developed country. Strip out the features of the service and say, hey, here it's for an emerging market. Don't do that. Don't strip down an existing service and say it is. Second thing, he says that you must build something from the ground up in the countries that you are going to serve, right? And the third thing he said was, you cannot do anything in music, games, email, you know, enterprise stuff, none of that. you cannot do any of that because there were multiple other business units within the company that were addressing those opportunities. So didn't want any overlapping areas. So you go and create something that doesn't exist today. This is wow, great. For me, it was a big challenge, but I took it up thinking that, hey, here I've created many firsts. The first music deal was signed by me. I was instrumental in the first video streaming services commercially available in this part of the world, in Asia. I was involved in bringing television onto a mobile phone, getting the ecosystem set up. I was involved even in the first direct printing from a phone into a printer. These days you don't do that, but 15 years back, that was something of a technological breakthrough. So I had quite a few string of firsts to my credit. And I said, well, never mind, let me just take it on and see where I head out. So that was a conversation, a little bit of butterflies in the stomach, but a lot of adrenaline rush to go and try and build something new.
And from that emerged Life Tools, right?
From there emerged Life Tools about a year later. Yeah.
So what a tall order that is. What an incredible story. You really had, as I understand it, you really didn't have a lot of guidance. They basically said, look, go and build this from the ground up
Yes.
in emerging markets at a time when tech really wasn't what it is today. Is that a fair statement?
It is absolutely a fair statement. There was no data, there was no smartphones accessible to that target audience. Services were not popular. So the consumer behavior was not set to be online. It was not even set to be online on the PCs, right? Let alone the mobiles.
So tell us about Life Tools and what did you do next? After your boss, you get the call, you're excited, but you're also probably a little nervous that you can, as to whether you can pull this off, right? Certainly I would be. So what did you do next?
Well, I was thrown another curveball months down the road from that discussion when I had said, okay, I'll accept the opportunity. I was said that now there is a global conference and my boss had to talk something about the emerging market business unit. So he says, I'll give you a 10-minute slot in front of an international audience, which is comprising of the top analysts and mobile operators and everyone. You'll have to go and talk to them about what you intend doing. I said, wow, this is like I was still doing my older job. And then I had to shake myself up to start thinking about how this will all emerge, right? So at that point in time, I went there and I said a few things which, if I look back, they were like prophecies which came true to the T. Some of those elements were, I said, the internet will not happen on the browser. It'll happen outside the browser. It'll happen directly on a mobile phone, right? So even on a mobile phone, not on the browser. By then we had experimented with some apps. And I said, this is how it'll look like, right? So even if there is no data, it'll have to be extremely iconic, extremely graphical interface for this target audience, who's not a sophisticated target audience. So in effect, I was describing an app experience. Okay.
Right.
And then I said, it'll be hyper-local. And if it has to make sense and it has to make an impact in people's lives, it can't be giving people information about what's happening about the presidency and the election in the US. That's international stuff. People won't relate to that because that's not their realm. So their boundary and their bounds are extremely livelihood, life improvement in the local geographical context. So it'll have to be there, right? So you can imagine it's such a tall order. The ecosystem has to develop and it has to penetrate so deep inside, right? And I said that it'll obviously be in local language. That was an obvious one. But the hyperlocal part, it won't happen on a browser. It'll be an app-like experience, even though apps were not as popular a term back then. There used to be Java, JAG, JAR files, so to speak. So this was calling it out at that point in time and saying that this would happen. So yeah, that was the first brush with reality, so to speak, on what I should be going and doing. Then came about the real journey. Then came about understanding what would really add value to that target segment. And, I'm fortunate to have come from, I'm a native of India. These days I live in Singapore, but I grew up in India. And I could see people of various diasporas, various socioeconomic classes intermingled in society, and I had the opportunity to have deep insight into how different sections of society think and what their main concerns are, etc. So if I were to create something for someone who's going to buy a phone for the first time, you realize that it has to impact their livelihood, it has to impact their life. So I coined the term that it has to be a livelihood and life improvement suite of services. And then I went about figuring what should those services be. So most people in rural areas would be involved in agriculture. So I said agriculture would be one vertical. Then when you go and ask more these people about what you would expect from a magic box. See, the phone was a magic box for them. Firstly, they didn't have communication. Then it had a radio. Then it had a torch. Then it could, it could give them entertainment. So tons of things started coming out of this magic box. So once that starts happening, your expectations know no bounds. So it was very easy for us to, poke them a bit and say, hey, what next? This is, well, can this improve my income? Can I earn more money some way or the, I don't know how, but can I earn more money using this phone? Can I have a better future with this? And so that's how EdTech literally came about, right? So this says, okay, so what is it that you want in your future? Well, my life is whatever it is, but I would like my kids' life to be better here on. So education became a key vertical for them.
So that was incredibly prophetic on your part, because kids today, they're all about this, aren't they? All about the mobile phone. And you have apps now, you have companies like Nobi that are putting some very robust content on those phones. But back then, when you created Life Tools, did you coin the name Life Tools? Was that your... You did. That was a great name. And so, as I understand it, according to Forbes, you were 40 years old. Is that correct? 40 years old?
Yeah, around there. Yes.
40 years old. And now all of a sudden, you have millions of people who can access, this is the net result, data, we'll call them sound bites, but things that got them excited. And from a design thinking standpoint, and tell me if I've got this right, from a design thinking standpoint, you really had to understand what people in India wanted, what kind of sound bites they wanted, right? And so what did that look like? Give me some examples of some of the things that they would be able to access, for, I believe it was 40 cents or 60 cents at the time, because you had to make this darn thing accessible, right?
It was design thinking all the way through, even though I was not familiar with the term or the practice back then, but now reflecting back, it was design thinking to the T, the process to the T. So the way we went about it was actually understanding the person in their daily life. So I'll give you examples, right? So for example, if it was education-oriented service, I say education-oriented service because we had yet to actually clarify what that service would be. So in the education vertical, right? Then you went about checking and you found that people lack confidence if they cannot speak in English, if they cannot respond back in English, if somebody were to speak to you in English and you were not able to fluently talk or not able to fully understand, it was a big, confidence barrier. So Learn English became one of the services that we decided to offer. Then the second thing, a little separate, was people, students, and obviously parents as well, would like their kids to have some supplementary tuition classes beyond school, because everyone felt that school was just not enough. You had to supplement with it. Now, can you imagine? And this came out as a big revelation to me as well. When you look in the rural areas, small towns, there is a dearth of teachers. There's a dearth of good teachers, number one. Number two, people are not comfortable sending their daughters out of the home quite often, eve teasing and a whole host of things. So they are very protective in terms of, especially when they're very young, right? So that was a concern of the parents. And now that you can see the germ of remote distance learning came about
Yes.
from that point in time, right? So I said, wow, great. So why don't we give them exam preparation stuff? So we started with exam preparation for 8th, 9th, the secondary education. And there are multiple boards. So you have the multiple curriculums of various boards, then multiple Indian languages. By the way, this was replicated across China, Indonesia, and Nigeria. So we followed the same process once we had figured it out and cracked it in India. And then I'll give you an example about learning English. Right. So how does one go about learning English remotely when there is no tutor, there is no voice, there is nothing at all, right? So imagine you would get a word inquiry and learning a new word, inquiry. So alongside the English spelling inquiry, in your local language, for you to be able to phonetically pronounce it correctly was the pronunciation in your local language. So in Tamil or English or Hindi or Marathi, etc., and those scripts, the word was there. So you could pronounce it correctly. Then came the meaning of the word inquiry in English in a few sentences. Then that was translated in the same local language, right? So you're learning English in your own local language. So you understand exactly what it was. And then there was an example, a sentence constructed. Now, can you beat it, Harris? People used to copy these things and create notebooks. And on each page, a new word, and they used to copy this. And we've seen this at play, right? Because we used to do quite a lot of field work and go and check out how people are responding and receiving these things. So we saw, and it was really heart-wrenching. You could see people writing out like a workbook and keeping the rest of the page free. Why? Because they then went about in a group of friends going and revisiting those words and writing new sentences about those words, constructing new sentences with those new words. And this was like, so you can imagine, right? It was remote, it was social, it was all in one. And at this point in time, there was no data, there were no apps. The experience was delivering that enablement to the people. So that's an example that I would want.
This sounds to me like the true genesis of distance learning. And we could not do what we do today. You know, I'm a higher education lawyer, and in the midst of COVID and even before COVID, distance learning is essential. And we could not do what we're doing today without, some of the creations that you brought to the world. It's quite incredible. And of course, this was India, so you even had cricket news, as I understand
Yes.
it, right? Cricket news,
Yes,
and agricultural news, because of the huge, in China too, right? If you covered China, you would have at least half the country, probably much more of the country back in 2005. It was rural, And so, right, and so you really got I'm sure you really got a lot of coverage, and you got these devices into their hands for cheap, right? You weaned them on something, on access. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely. There was a reason for them to access the services, right? So as long as it was making an impact,